We're back. Season 8, Episode 1. School Days, Part 1. Just as a fresh reminder, for those of you who have never actually been aware of this, this is new to me. Never seen this episode before. In fact, I knew some extremely small, minor things about it. But for the most part, all I really knew about it was the fact that it involved school. So several parts of this episode actually caught me by surprise, and I'll admit that. Good surprise, too. So this is a long one. We just talked about law. We just spent Lore Week talking about legality. Okay. First of all, they acknowledge the movie. Continuity counter. Just the one. They acknowledge the movie. The crappy, dumb, terrible, subpar movie. And the table got bigger. That was cool, too. That's the far more interesting part to me, is the fact that the table literally expanded, which makes perfect sense. As we've discussed so many times, the pattern naturally spreading makes perfect sense. You know, it starts with the core princesses and their thing, and then it starts spreading to the three ponies and how they interact with each other, and then it just spreads and spreads and spreads. But if you're paying attention, it's been spreading extremely slowly. Very, very minor jumps forward until it hit the, what do you call it? The point of no return. I can't remember what that's called all of a sudden. It's something that came up with regards to the flood over in the Haloverse, for those of you who are aware of that. Because there's a certain point, mathematically, where something is no longer just building slowly. It's the point where it's going, and it just absolutely snowballs. It's not snowballing, because that's a different concept. Snowballing is gradually getting bigger. There's a mathematical concept where thing just kind of goes pokong and starts absolutely smashing through. And we've talked about this before with regards to the pattern. This is exactly what's been happening. Pretty much the moment, I think we could say with definitiveness, that pretty much the moment Ponyville was founded and got set up and got going, that's probably the moment of blank that's been happening with regards to the pattern and the spreading of friendship. Because from then on, it's been accelerating and accelerating and accelerating, right? Far more so than the previous millennia. So, makes perfect sense. Map's starting to expand. We're starting to get outside of Equestria. Yeah, Ponyville is still the center of the map, or at least very close to it. So that's kind of relevant. I should also probably mention that it makes perfect sense that the show would have an easier time referencing the movie than the movie would the show, just because of development cycles. A movie takes years to make. An episode of television takes like a month. Sometimes 6 months if you're going on the full development cycle, but even still, much easier for the show to reference the movie than the movie to reference the show. And I only point that out because the movie, one of my biggest complaints about the movie was the fact that it was effectively a season 2 episode. Whereas this episode was able to much more clearly and definitively reference the movie and make it fit in better. So it fits in one way but not the other, effectively. Anyways. So, they're going to start teaching outside of Equestria, which is something we've discussed many times before Hydrogen Whisperer. Like 10 or so times, I think, separately. The idea has come up of the territory beyond Equestria. We've seen bits and pieces of it, even before the movie, of the Changelings and the Badlands, and the Yaks and Yak-Yakistan, and the Dragons and the Dragonlands, all that fun stuff. And they always go out of their way to make it clear that those areas are distinctly and geologically different, to make them visually different so you can tell that's not Equestria. And we've seen every single one of those places has been in need of some friendship, and we've already started reaching up to several of them with regards to everything I just mentioned. The Yaks, the Griffins, and the Dragons being the 3 big ones, but also the Changelings. That's 4 big ones there. So, so they're opening a school of friendship. Not sure what I think of that. I grabbed a snapshot of the school. I might use that for the thumbnail. We'll see. I don't know what the theme of this season's going to be. Yeah, we're going to get hippogriffs, too. I'm going to see that in just a moment. But that was in the movie, and... So... And I'm not there yet. So they're opening a school of friendship. Twilight says, it's not like there's a rule book to follow for making a school. Yeah, there is. There's something called the EEA, Equestria Education Association. We'll loop back to that. We'll loop back to that. We'll come back to that. For now, something that is mentioned right off the bat is that Celestia mentions that they are entirely focused on ponies. Celestia specifically says that these schools are used and standardized for Pegasi, Earth ponies, unicorns. Okay. So then Maurice LaMarche shows up, and I immediately recognized him. How could you miss that? How can you miss that voice? I mean, he's a great voice actor in general, but he's pretty much doing the Brain voice, which is the one he's the most known for, I would say, in animation circles. By the way, am I the only one who got some serious Harry Potter vibes from the courtroom? With Chance, it's not actually a courtroom. It's just their meeting room. Yes, Pinky and the Brain. That Maurice LaMarche plays Brain from Pinky and the Brain. He's just, yeah. He's awesome, by the way. He is a great voice actor, and he adds some wonderful stuff to Chancellor Naysay, who I immediately mention is not only obviously antagonistic, but very Snape. Now, we'll discuss more about him in a minute, but there is one thing they bring up right after the beginning. He's completely just no. The whole attitude and vibe he gives is, you're an entitled princess, and I don't need to listen to you. You go off and do your princessy things, do your heroics and all your adventures. I'll be here actually running the country, thank you, is very much the vibe he gets across. Then she mentions other species, and he's like, a school where ponies can learn to protect themselves. And then she says, no, we're trying to teach them. They would be, and he's like, and then he reiterates, well, okay. Just because we're going to put this up as a defense against the dark arts, defense against other racist thing, I'll allow it. And that's the thing that changes his mind. We'll circle back to that point. Now, oh no, apparently I'm going to bring up this point right now. My bad. What's really irritating to me is I actually kind of agree with him. Not fully, obviously, because he's a bigoted jackass. But, I mean, the idea of them having proper military, actual military training is something that Equestria needs. And has needed several times. It's all well and good to rely on Captain America, Iron Man, and Superman, but it would be nice to have some kind of actual military. And as I've pointed out dozens of times in this very show, military does not just involve killing other people. There are many, many facets of a military that do not involve shooting people. So, an actual military school to teach people how to interact with other species and how to work with them and how to do stuff and how to build and how to engineer and all the fun stuff that goes along with being a military would be nice to have. This is why I keep emphasizing that word, actually, because, yeah, you could argue that they have a military. I would disagree personally, but even if I agreed with you, they do not have an actual military. Anyways, moving on. So, they have the school reveal. Very cool shot. I, of course, have the picture, like I said. I don't know. I need to decide now what I'm going to use this as a thumbnail, because actually I have basically 1 week. So I have until next week's episodes to decide what thumbnail I'm using. So if anybody has any suggestions for a thumbnail, this would kind of be the time to mention that. Because those episodes are going to go live next week. Episode 2. Okay, I'll look for a thumbnail in episode 2. Cool. The school reveal was nice. That's cool. The tiny party cannon was legit. I should probably gush about the animation here because I feel bad for the animators who have spent however many hundreds of hours on the ridiculous amount of background events that are happening in this. Speaking as someone who's been getting more and more into animating my own videos with the extant videos and with the Trek Rewrite videos, one of the hardest things to do, one of the things that takes up the most time, is sitting down and doing all that stuff in the background. And there is so much background stuff in this, it's actually insane. So Twilight insists on following the rulebook. We'll come back to that. Hang on, let me jot that note down and move that note down here for when we're going to come back to that. So then the non-pony races show up. Now this is probably one of two parts of the episode that's not great. Um, the the problem here is that it's treated like it's a big reveal, right? It's treated like it's a, oh my gosh, there's other races. But the problem is they've already made it clear in two separate scenes that there's going to be other races. So why is this being treated as a reveal moment? So there's two ways they could fix this. Either they don't make it a reveal, or what I would do, I would get rid of the foreshadowing. I would get rid of the fact that the episode makes it extremely obvious that it's going to be non-ponies, and then, oh my gosh, it's non-ponies, and everyone's like, huh? That being said, I admit that even that's not a perfect choice, because that would kind of bypass a little bit of sense. You'd think the main five would know that they're going to be teaching non-ponies before they do it. And... anyways, so non-ponies show up, and that's kind of cool. We have, so let's just run through the thing here. We see a bunch, there's so much density of characterization in the next, like, 5 minutes that I had to pause the episode several times to keep track, because I couldn't write that fast, or type that fast. We have tons of kids bustling around. We have the quick, immediate, so we've got Grandpa Gruff, Prince Rutherford, Emperor, and Thorax. I'm going to go ahead and just add 4 continuity counters for all of those right now. Just bam, 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 bam. Because every one of them is introducing one of the news. This is not just continuity, though. And this is one of the reasons why continuity is good, because it establishes, in addition to the obvious, we have... excuse me. And still a little coffee. In addition to the obvious continuity, this makes sense in character and out. So let's cover out character first. Queen who? I'm sorry. The out of character significance here is that it's a way to... I can't think of a good word. Paperclip. It's a way to paperclip new characters to old ones. Now, if you don't understand what I mean by that, this is a semi-common facet of literary narrative tropes. I can't talk, apparently, right now. It's a common thing in narration, in writing, to try and establish a new character by connecting them to an old character. Not just to help establish the new character in character, but primarily so that the audience is more accepting of the new character. You know, how many times have you seen a work of fiction where there's this new character out of absolutely nowhere and nothing connecting them to anything previous, and you or someone you know, or maybe on the forums or the threads or the conventions or whatever you've gone to, people have been like, I don't know if I'm into them. I don't know if I'm into that, because they just come up out of nowhere. People tend to be more accepting if the Joker introduces some new character, right? Instead of just some new character being there out of nowhere, to use the common trope. And so, yeah, there's several examples of this. And so it makes perfect sense, out of character, for them to be like, hey, Grandpa Gruff and Rutherford and Ember and Thorax and what's his face. Now, so that's good out of character. It's good in character too, because it showcases two very important things. First of all, I already mentioned, it helps to characterize the new characters. You get a little bit of who they are and why they're here because of their reaction with the old characters we've already interacted with. You know, we see how, and I'm going to screw up their names because they're all new characters to me, but I'm pretty sure it's Yona, and how excited she is here, and you can kind of see that kind of because of how she plays off of Rutherford, and how he's obviously excited for her to be there. We can see how Ember is basically forcing Smolder to be here, and is just kind of like, hey, I'm ordering you to do this, so you don't have a choice. We see how Thorax is trying to still be his, it's okay, I know it's a little scary, but you can work this out. And we just get those little tidbits as we're going through them. Oh, even Grandpa Gruff, who was the dick Griffin back in the day, is actually being pretty legit about all this. And we'll get to the hippogriff in just a second. But the first thing I wanted to mention is the other reason this is so relevant with regards to in-character. And that's the fact that this shows how much political weight is being thrown into this school. Thorax is the leader of the Changelings. Ember is the leader of the Dragons. Prince Rutherford is the leader of the Yaks. I'm going to stop there, but you get the idea. The Queen What's-Her-Face is the leader of the Hippogriffs. Grandpa Gruff is no leader, but then again, they don't have a leader, so that kind of fits. So yeah, that's 4 out of 5 major political figures who are all putting their weight and their action into making this school work. That is a huge deal in universe. And Twilight even references this several times, that both she and Celestia have specifically tried to make this work by reaching out to these people who know them personally and yada, yada, yada. It's also worth noting, it is implied, although never stated outright, that part of the reason they agreed with this is because they personally knew the main six, and therefore they didn't trust Equestria, they didn't trust the EEA, and they didn't trust the school. But they did trust those six, and therefore, okay, we'll go ahead and do this, right? That especially comes up later in the episode. So this is a great move right here. This is a great move. I cannot gush about this enough. And that leads me to my first major discussion point. Questionable content. How many of you know what I'm talking about before I go into it? I've got the... Hang on, I can't see my own camera. There we go. I've got the books. I've got two of my books right there. Right there. They're part of my set. I've been following questionable content since it came out. That one's actually signed by... I don't remember how to pronounce his name. He actually sketched a sketch of Hannelore for me. It's really cool. Anyways, so why am I bringing up questionable content? Well, questionable content's been going on for, I want to say, about 14 or 17 years. I forget which. It's one of the two directions. And it's been on air for a long time. It's never gotten boring. It's never gotten stale or dry. And 2000, okay, that's actually longer than I thought. That's 18 years now. I was close with the first one. So, yeah, that's insane. How could you possibly have a show, because that's effectively what a webcomic is, it's just a static show, continue to stay interesting for so long? Well, the first thing you don't do is you don't pull a Simpsons. And I'm going to use The Simpsons as a direct comparison, because Simpsons doesn't do what questionable content does. And there's a reason that The Simpsons got bad and questionable content has only been getting better. New things. You introduce new concepts, you introduce new characters, and you still have your core, right? I mean, there's still relevance to Marty, and there's still relevance to... Oh my god, I can't think of her name. Faye. You know, there's still relevant characters, but they have effectively been pulled down to secondary character status because new people get introduced, and then we do their arcs, and via them, we introduce new characters, and we do their arcs. And there's a reason the cast of questionable content is like gargantuan nowadays. It's because of the fact that he has been very carefully layering in new characters via connection to old characters. Sound familiar? In order to help introduce and study them and have their different aspects and their different perspectives. Yeah, there's a reason... Ha, Ross. But there's a reason Steve has become a cameo character at this point. It's because his story was done. He's still there. He's still a friend of Marty. He still shows up when he's a friend. You know, he's interacting with Martin, but that's it. He's over there now. He might come back. I mean, you could do that too. You can have a character go into the background and then bring them back up the front. They've done that several times. Hannelore is a good example of someone they did that with. And if you're paying attention, this is the exact opposite of what The Simpsons did. You're probably thinking, but The Simpsons has a huge cast. But The Simpsons has always had the same huge cast. It hasn't changed. New characters show up for one episode and then go away, because that's kind of their shtick, is bringing on guest stars. They're known for that. But that's it. Homer is still the same dumb, I'm an idiot, bad parent, ha-ha, fat guy that he's been for 30 years. And the episodes still focus on the same cast. No variation, no alteration. And yeah, actually, I was going to amend that. He actually got worse over time. You remember back in the day when Homer was an interesting and engaging character who was a good father and a good husband? I know that sounds strange to say that, but if you've seen the older Simpsons, like up till about season 8, you know what I'm talking about. Homer was a good father and a good husband. And that was one of his character traits, was that he wasn't smart, but he was a hard worker who cared and loved for his family. And that was him, the everyman. Yeah, how many of you remember Do It For Her? What do you think that came from? One of my favorite episodes, by the way. Nowadays, Simpson, he's just a jackass idiot. Have you seen the Simpsons movie? Which dials him up to such aggressive levels of terrible assholery and stupidity that I found myself liking the movie less because Homer was in it. You get my point. I could actually dissect all of the characters in Simpsons and how they've devolved to worse versions of themselves, but that's not what we're here to do. Because all of this is relevant to this episode. I can tell you right now that, and I hope, God, I hope that I'm right here, but it looks like they're clearly bothering to establish these new 6 characters. The Student 6 is what I wrote them down. I don't know what they're officially called. And make them new characters. Pull the questionable content thing. Bring in a new cast with new stories and new adventures and new story types that you can do with those new people. Now, I should mention, MLP has kind of done this off and on throughout the course of its run, of course, over the course of the previous 7 seasons. Not with new characters per se, although they have done that. New characters have drifted in, usually as secondary characters. You know, there's Starlight, obviously. Trixie kind of came in as a secondary character who was semi-recurring. We had Discord, who came in as a secondary character who was semi-recurring, and yada. There are other examples. You get the point. But the way MLP has usually done this is actually by using different dynamics. And this is something I've pointed out before, and something I'm going to do on the spreadsheet someday when I have all that wonderful time to do it with. And that is the using different character pairings in order to tell a different type of story than you normally could. It is still doing something new. It's just pairing people up in unusual ways in order to make sure that the stories stay fresh and interesting, right? Sometimes succeeds, sometimes doesn't. Okay, so that's the first discussion I wanted to put. So I'm really hoping that these are new major characters and they're doing exactly what I want them to do. If they are, that's awesome. And there is a risk. It's worth noting there is a risk with adding new characters. Of course there is. But this is just my opinion, of course. If your choices are The Simpsons or questionable content, regardless of quality, I will always pick the questionable content part of that equation. I will always pick the risk in that equation, 100% of the time. Because the alternative is what happened to The Simpsons, and that's guaranteed. You will slowly degenerate over time into something bland. Or you'll get canceled. Those are the 2 options there. The Simpsons has kept going because Fox. Let's just be blunt about that. But I would rather they try something new, because at least there is a chance of it being good and keeping things interesting, even if they sometimes fail at it. My take on that. So, where's my notes? So yeah, now we talk about Silverstream. You'll notice I've been kind of deliberately avoiding her. Silverstream is interesting and kind of awesome. We also have hippogriffs instead of griffins, which I only point out because I wonder how many people completely missed that distinction. In fact, question, how many of you think that hippogriffs and griffins, without it being specifically called to, like it just vaguely in the back of your mind, are the same thing? Now, I had a little bit of backing on this because I've played World of Warcraft, and in World of Warcraft, the hippogriffs and the griffins are very different creatures. The only similarity is the fact that both happen to be able to fly. But I will admit, when I first saw her, I'm like, who the heck is this? And it took a while for them to mention that she's a hippogriff versus a griffin. Like, they actually bothered to take a while to distinguish that. So I admit, for a while, I was trying to figure out who the heck she was and why she was connected to anything. Because I'll freely admit, I kind of forgot the sea pony section of that movie because I didn't like that movie. So, she's cool. But now we have our base character traits. And you'll notice this is the same pattern they used with the main 6, or rather the main 5 back in the day. And you caught that, right? Because there's only 5 here. And there's only 5 non-ponies. The 6th is, I didn't even write down his name. Who's the pony? And so he kind of takes the Twilight slot of being the extra kind of thing. And I'm curious if they're going to be doing anything with Sandbar's apparently his name. Because the main 5 were established, and their base character traits were established with one quick scene each all the way back in Friendship is Magic in the first episode. And same thing here. We've got let's see. So we've got the jerk. We've got the enthusiast, who is a bit clumsy. We've got the screw this, I don't want to be a part of this, aka the attitude. We've got the shy, and we've got the wonderment. Huh, that sounds familiar. And if you think about it, you can clearly see how each one of those 5 clearly connects with one of the main 5 as well. So we have our introductions, and yeah, Sandbar, who is the grounder for all of them, just like Twilight. Now, so again, very clear parallels here. Now we have that introductions, but then they continue to characterize them, which is a good move, in the song. I'm gonna go admit I didn't care for the song that much. I rated it pretty low on my song list. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7th lowest on my list is where I put it. It's not a great song, but if you muted it, it's actually really good. Because the visual storytelling on on display, I don't know why I'm starting with a P there, is really, really good. And, well, this is when we have some things to talk about. They have these transitions between the classes, and everyone's figuring out everything, and everything's fun and cool. And I had my thought here, and I'm literally typing, I don't think the main 6 are the best teachers, but they would be much better tutors or apprenticeship teachers, aka someone who teaches someone through action. You know, it's okay, today we're going to be working on this kind of a thing. And I make that distinction. I don't know how many of you live in the United States, but here in the United States, we don't teach via the apprenticeship method. We teach via books and tests, and that's pretty much the system that is used here in the States. And so during the song, again, the visual storytelling of the song is quite good because it shows how they're good apprenticeship teachers. And then Twilight comes in and says, no, we need to follow the book. And then they quickly turn into standardized teachers. Now we have the discussion about standardized teaching and standardized schools. But before we do that, someone asked what the lowest song was, and that is Blank Blanks Forever, which I just didn't really work for me. What the heck is that, Loner? So, I did do a little research on this just to make sure that I knew what I was talking about and wasn't just going by my own experience, but allow me to share a note that I wrote down earlier in this very video. I love learning. Does anybody share that mentality? I'm just curious. I really like learning. I really enjoy researching and understanding and figuring out new things and correcting old ideas. I love learning. I hated school. I hated every goddamn minute of it. How many of you have that exact same mentality? Now, I mentioned this. Why can't I mute? No, I'm actually not sick anymore. I'm at the point where all of the body has dealt with all the virus, and now it's coming out. You know, it's the tail end of being sick. So I'm fine. I'm just coughing a bunch. So where do I even begin? This is actually a large topic. Let's cover the most bare bones, basic level of the problem here. If you want to standardize your schooling, it makes sense from a completely detached, non-thinking about it perspective. Like, on the most surface level, that makes sense. We want to make sure everyone has a fair chance, right? We want to make sure everyone has the same tools available to them to be able to develop and grow and do whatever they're going to do when they're an adult. And that mentality, I'm with. But that is only a surface level perspective. Because the problem is, when you have standardized schooling, there are only 2 ways to do it. It's 3. Okay, we'll pull it technically. There's only 3 ways to do it. You teach down to the lowest common denominator. You teach up to the highest common denominator. This is the asterisk. I don't think anybody does this. Or you try to figure out a median and teach to that. Now, if you don't understand what I mean by that, not everyone's the same. I know. Hear me out. When you're done getting your brains back into your skull, bear with me, because not everyone is the same. We don't learn the same ways. We don't have the same interests. We don't have the same attention spans. We don't have the same the ways we process certain specific topics. Do me a favor. Think about when you were back in school. Can you think of one class you actually really liked? I can. History. Back in, this would have been 6th grade for me. I actually remember my history teacher. She and I got along pretty well. And I loved my history class. I loved learning about that. Can you think of a class you hated? I can too. Hang on, I got a third one. But I want to see if anybody... By the way, geometry for me. Mostly because my geometry teacher was terrible, but geometry has never quite fit in my brain. I can do a decent amount of math, but geometry just never worked for me. Let's not even talk about trig. No, I actually loved cooking class. Although I didn't learn much, it was just fun to cook. Here's the middle one. This is the most important one. How many of you don't really remember a class that was so boring that it made no impact on you? And this is the important part, because you probably can't answer this question, but there's probably at least a class or two that you went to that you don't remember so much that you probably didn't retain anything from it. You didn't learn anything from it. The classes you loved, you learned because you wanted to. The classes you hate, you learned because you hated it and it was memorable. But what about those classes in the middle that made no impact, that were just gray, dull wallpaper paste? Think about it. This is only the first layer down of the problem with standardized schooling. Because I've actually, again, I did a little research during this thing, and I know from having talked to several friends and family and people I know, that all of them had the exact same reaction here. Now, again, this is just the States. I don't know how other countries do this. But here in the States, standardized schooling pretty much means that the majority of those classes sit in the third category, the middle, and are effectively wasted time. Wasted time for the kids, wasted time for the teachers who are trying and struggling to get them to learn something, and wasted time for the school, wasted money, because Lord knows that's being penny pinched entirely too much in this country, in my opinion. Yeah, you know, you want to know something? I just mentioned a class that I love, but I got another one for you. When I got to high school, I think I mentioned that, I've mentioned this a few times, I spent my freshman and my sophomore year cramming every required class I could. So when I got to junior and senior years, I had like one required class, two. I had 2 required classes in junior year and 1 required class in senior year. And that was it. I could just do whatever I wanted with the rest of it. And so I just tried out all kinds of stuff because I actually planned it out like that. Now, first of all, nobody tells you can do that. That probably should be something that students are made aware of, because that was, in my opinion, a substantially better method to do that. But second of all, there's a class I took in my junior year which clicked with me in a way that I can't even describe to you, but I'm sure you understand. It was just like, oh, this makes so much sense, and this is awesome, and I can't wait to learn more about it. You know what it was? Accounting. Learning the beginning of the accounting class. I'll never forget this, because I was there with a bunch of other kids who were taking it as a, it was math credit, so they were taking it in place of like geometry or whatever. And so none of them were paying attention except for me, who was like, hang on, and I'd call this teacher over. She was a nice woman. I'd call her over and hey, could you help me with this? Could you help me? I want to do this. I want to do this type of calculation. And we were just learning how to use spreadsheets and how the terminology of how you're supposed to count debt and how debt should go against this thing and so forth. And she and I actually got along pretty well, because I was the one who was constantly like, hey, let's do this. Because I wanted to learn it, because it was in the former category. Standardized teaching is, so you can see the flaws, the obvious flaws. Let's go with flaw number 2. I may not go any deeper than this, because we could go way down into the weeds with this. Flaw number 2. Standardized teaching here in the States is so it's standardized both ways, is how I want to phrase that. It's not just standardized for the students, it's standardized for the teachers, and therefore standardized for the school. The teachers have quotas, and those teachers have to make it so that the school can make its quota. Now, anybody will tell you that the moment you make something a quota, something that's part of a checklist that you have to do, that pretty much inevitably saps some of the oomph, reality, passion, drive, or anything good out of doing it. There's reasons to have checklists. Don't mistake me. I have checklists myself. But when you start making quotas for this kind of thing... And so this is why, to go back to my earlier point, you have 3 options for how to standardize. Well, there's a reason they standardize down, at least in some states. And I did do some research on this. I'm not going to name states. But several states specifically test down to the lowest common denominator, specifically because that means more students will pass, which means those teachers will get those checks, and those schools will get those checks, and the school will get their check from the government to fund them, because their funding is tied to how well they test. Now, I'm saying that very specifically because it's not how well they teach, it's how well they test. Now, how many of you are aware of the research that is at this point, I'm pretty sure it's 100% true. I should have done a little more looking on this, but I was already kind of behind. I firmly believe in the idea that of cramming. You cram all the information in, you take the exam, and then it's gone. I myself am an example of this. When I used to do the video game ruminations, I would literally forget some of the games I did ruminations on because I crammed them. Because it was all trying to get that information all up into your short-term memory, and then it just evaporates because it's gone and it's done, and you don't have to think about it anymore. Testing encourages cramming. Now, if we go more into the weeds, I don't have a good solution to that. I know that sounds like a strange thing to mention, but I point it out because in several ways, the argument could and has been leveled that, you have to have some kind of measurement stick. You need to know how well the school is doing. And if you don't know how well the school is doing, you don't know to improve anything or not. Now, the first and most obvious thing is to remove funding, detach funding from how well the school's doing, because that's stupid on every possible level. But then, then it's like, okay, how do we have a measuring stick for how well the school is doing? Because how do you decide, how do you perceive that students are actually retaining information other than testing? And that sucks to figure out. That is a very difficult question to figure out an option that's going to fit. Because remember, you're not just picking for people you or people like you even. You're picking for everyone. The amount of people who go to standardized schools is so gargantuanly huge that by simple statistics, you're going to have pretty much every type of personality and mentality and learning size and learning qualifications and learning disabilities all within one gigantic glob of people. How do you do that? My answer is obvious. Get rid of standardized education. But if you're going to keep standardized education, how do you fix that? Actually, I do, Ross. You'll notice that, as I'm going to point out in a bit here, automatic clicks and connections between the student sticks happen almost immediately. Like, instantaneously. You'll also notice it's divided by gender lines. I don't think that's on purpose. I just think it's interesting. I agree with that sentence, Larian. Equal does not mean the same. Just because you and I are equal does not make us identical. Duh. It's such a dumb thing to say out loud because it's so obviously duh. It's like saying, hang on. These glasses are the same as these glasses, right? And therefore they should be exactly identical, right? Because that's how that works. Yeah. Anyways. Moving along. And I agree, Sierra Mike. This is why I say I don't want to get too far into the weeds. Because the obvious problems are exactly that. I do firmly believe that standardized education is kind of a flawed idea to begin with. I do. I think that even if you go down one layer from that, I think it starts to fall apart immediately, and I think we need a better education system But if we're stuck with it, if we're stuck with that system, fixing it is just a nightmare and might not actually be possible. I'm not sure about that. Anyways, standardized education. Now, I know that's going way off topic, but at the same time, it's totally on topic. What does this episode show us? Let's bring it back to the episode's relevance. The moment they start standardized testing and doing the approved guidelines for exactly how you're supposed to learn, what happens? Let me go ahead and point to a specific example, because it's one that jumped out at me immediately. Rainbow is teaching loyalty. Now, that sounds like a strange thing to point out. Yeah, the students and the teachers both start not only not having fun, but they stop learning. So, Rainbow Dash is teaching loyalty. So what she does is she has a bit where, I think it's Yona, is jumping up. By the way, fun fact, Yona means bear in Persian. I just wanted to share that. Yona is jumping off, and all the students are there to catch her, right? Now you might think, what's that have to do with loyalty? First of all, everything. But second of all, that teaches trust, too. Teamwork, which loyalty is very significantly about. And I only point that out because it's like half a second of just that. But you could tell that whoever animated that scene put some real thought and effort into what kind of a trust exercise, what kind of a learning exercise Rainbow would do in order to teach that. And you notice they're completely with it. They had her. They were ready. They were braced. I checked. I even rewound just to be sure. So, how do you, like there's this bit, I forget who it is, maybe it was Fluttershy, one of them specifically says, during the song lyrics, how do you teach blank in a classroom? The answer is you don't. Now, to bring this, again, to the show's relevance, oh my God, Sierra Mike. I'm not even touch that one with a 10-foot pole. It was an honesty. You're right. It was Applejack. How do you teach honesty in a freaking classroom? The answer is you don't. Now, again, to leave real life for a second and to focus on the show, what they're trying to teach are elements of friendship. How do you teach elements of friendship in a standardized class? And the answer is obvious. You don't. There are topics you can learn in a classroom in a standardized operation. There are. There are certain things that a rule book and a billboard and a speech can teach you about. But basically everything they're trying to teach is not on that list. So, yeah. This then leads to... Sorry, my throat's starting to get a little croaky here. This then leads to... is this what bored is? I love the idea that Silverstream hasn't been bored until now. This is bored. Am I bored? Yak, of course, Yona insists that yaks are best. Yaks are the greatest. And Smolder's like, no, dragons are better. This is when we really start to see the dividing lines happen between them. Then there's this interesting little tidbit that they just slide under the rug, which is very well designed. Applejack says, everyone. Small little anecdote. Have you noticed that throughout the course of however many months we've been covering this series, I have made it a point to not say every pony or everybody each time? And my main reason for doing so is because I feel that's an unnecessary distinction, right? There's no reason to do that. They're people. So they're calling us people, whether they're ponies or Applejacks or dragons or whatever, right? They're just people. So I've been saying everyone this entire time. Apparently, in universe, they're having a bit of trouble making that distinction. I do also think it's interesting that Applejack would be the person who, would be having that issue, as demonstrated. I'm sure others will or have had that issue as well. So, this then leads to a dialogue line. Now, I know we just finished talking about standardized testing and standardized schooling. Twilight says every school in Equestria follows these rules and they're fine. So, problem number one with that, that's stupid. Problem number two with that, that's for ponies. Several times they mentioned that is specifically for ponies. Problem number three with that, that's for schools who are teaching you basic everyday learning stuff, not a school for friendship. So several people earlier brought up vocational and trade schools. Imagine if you were going to a trade school where you're supposed to learn on the job something, and you get there and it's a standardized school. Do you see the problem? But wait, I've got a fourth problem with this statement. We're told the other schools are fine, but we never see it. And with a show that's as well written as this one tends to be, I feel like that's on purpose, and I'm curious if that's going to come up in the future. Because we're only told the other schools are fine. We're only told that these rules work for the other schools. I find myself wondering how well they're actually doing. But yes, Twilight has very, very clearly, absolutely fixated on this exact line, on this lane is actually a better way to put that. This is how she's going about it. Which is funny, because she absolutely has the political capital to bypass the EEA if she wanted to. But she is choosing not to, at least for now. We'll see if she does that in the next episode. I'm curious where this is going to go. I don't know. This, of course, then leads to Ocellus? I forget how you pronounce her name. But she impersonates Rarity, kind of badly, but manages to convince, Fluttershy to move on. And that makes me kind of tilt my head a little bit. Oh, it is a cell. Okay, so Ocellus. It makes me tilt my head a bit because it's demonstrating something we've already seen on this show. Pegasi, unicorns, and earth ponies make a good team. Why? Because they're each specialized in their own field, and thus the three of them combined can do some awesome stuff. Equestria. So we have a dragon, a hippogriff, a griffin, and a changeling. And I feel like I'm missing one. And a yak. Sorry. But you notice how all five of those, just by virtue of their species, all have their own little specialty. Oh, and an earth pony. I'm just pointing that out because each and every one of them does have the same general concept, and we see through action in not only this scene but the next scene how they work well together. Almost like that's the overall concept of the pattern, is the connections between and how people interact with each other and cooperate with each other. Huh. Hi, Gary. Croaky voice. So, this is the next scene so obviously smashes this point in that I almost thought about digging the episode art because it's so overt and so in your face that it's ridiculous. Twilight is literally talking, you hear her narration, sort of, as she's mentioning to Chancellor Naysay, by the way, that their school teaches these concepts as we see the Student 6 out and about learning those concepts through action and demonstrating acknowledgement and understanding of those concepts through doing them. Showing the types of concepts and understanding, which they already did earlier, too, if you're paying attention. So, naturally, this is when hijinks come in. This is the other flaw of the episode. And there's damage to the school, and yada, yada, yada. And this is immediately followed by racism. Now, hold up. I do have a topic here. So, Chancellor Naysay is, of course, anti-ponist. Or anti-non-ponist? He's a pony supremacist. Friendship. Twilight has a line. This is great. Twilight has a line. Friendship isn't just for ponies. His response is, it should be. Really think about that line. Really process that. That's... wow. That is amazingly just wow. Now, he is obviously really, really, really wrong. Not only has the whole show demonstrated this concept, not only does real life demonstrate this concept, but there's also the fact that this very specific episode, if you've somehow never seen the rest of the show, this one episode is absolutely demonstrating how wrong he is. But I hate that I have to add a but here. But you can absolutely see why he thinks this and where he's coming from. Now, I do not agree with him for the exact same reason that I don't agree with Star Swirl the Bearded. Considering that one of the writers of this episode also worked on that episode, I feel like that's deliberate. I feel like that's a deliberate callback to that old school mentality. Ponies for ponies. And remember, Star Swirl was pretty anti-friendship in general, for good reason. We discussed that at length in our previous episodes about why Star Swirl was anti-friendship, because he was stuck in a past mentality where it was arguable that you shouldn't focus on such an intangible because there were more immediate concerns. Now, I bring that up, excuse me, because Chancellor Nase is stuck in that old mentality. And, well, most ponies haven't really seen the other races the way the main six have. The episode calls attention to this, and I referenced this earlier, because there's a line, I wrote it down, Thorax, it's fine. We know not every pony sees us as you do. That helps to emphasize what I mentioned earlier, that they trusted the main six, specifically. And it's kind of shown here that even though they're upset about being, about this and screw Chancellor Nase, they're still trusting of the main six. They know the main six are cool with them, but not everyone else. Or at least not some other people, because let's be honest, we've only seen the one guy who's a dissenter. He just happens to have a bit of the center stage right now and kind of be in charge of the education board. But the other thing that I wanted to mention, and I'm only going to briefly mention this, very, very briefly. Star Swirl the Bearded being out of date in his mentality made sense. He's literally been locked away in a stasis spell for a millennia or whatever. But why would someone now, who's obviously older but still was born in the modern generation, why would someone in the modern generation still have such an outdated, out-of-concept idea? I mean, we've moved past a lot of that older crap, right? We've gotten to the point where it's okay to be homosexual. We've gotten to the point where it's okay to be a different gender, or not the gender you were born with, or a different color skin, or whatever, right? We're at the point where that stuff is accepted, right? I freely admit that I tend to fall into the trap of assuming that plenty of people think like I do, because a lot of people within my immediate circle of social interaction do have the same general mentality when it comes to people, tolerance, acceptance, everything, yada, yada, yada. And so I look at this and I'm like, okay. I mean, how could someone possibly still think, and I'm not even going to name a specific example, how could someone possibly still think that ponies are supremacists, for example? How could someone think that? I mean, that makes no sense. It's so out of date. And you see how the episode smashes this point as hard as it can. And I kind of like that. I kind of like that the episode just flat out, straight up, doesn't flinch away from it for even a second, and just says, yeah, no, here's this old guy who is completely out of date with his completely out of date, wrong mentality. Now, he then taps his badge. We had already brought this up a second ago. God, my voice is really starting to go out here. And does a lockdown spell. I find it interesting that he needed the badge to do that. That actually makes a degree of sense. Since he would probably not have the magic to do that himself, he needs the enchanted item, the artifact, to help him do that. I wonder if he could just do that in order to lock down any specific school. But it makes sense. Having that kind of magical augmentation is logical. I find myself wondering if Twilight could undo it, especially with Starlight's help, if they tried, because I imagine they could. I have no idea what they're going to do, of course, because I haven't seen the second episode, which is going to happen in just a bit. So, we'll see where this goes. But I'm gonna hold off on reviewing this for right now. I want to see episode 2 before we rate this, so don't let me forget to mention this when we get to episode 2. But now, I'm gonna go ahead and go watch episode 2, and I will see you all in about 24 minutes.